would not have any words to say if certain people were not in this room. Many years back, it must be probably 15 years ago, a young man who was barely 15 years old looked at me as I was running teaching classes in junior high and high school, English language arts and French, and then by night, moonlighting as an adjunct professor at least 3 or 4 different institutions at a time. And then he came to me one night and he said, "You know how you have always wanted to be a professor full-time in the college level?" And I said, "Yeah, but you know, if you really want to do that, you're going to have to send out those things." And I said, "But what things are you talking about?" And he said, "I think they call them applications." That evening, I went to my workroom and sent out my first 2 applications. Thank you, son. That was my son, Star Shahuri, who inspired me to follow my dream. Then I got into academia and realized I was hired to teach multicultural education, and my colleagues were very clear, unapologetically kind of, very clear that people of my kind, as they say, people like you, have not been very successful staying when we hire them. And it took me a couple of days to realize, what were they talking about, people like you? I had spent many years teaching everywhere. I really barely had any publications. So I think I understood very fast that they meant that unless I wrote lots of books and articles, I was not going to be able to make it in academia. People like me could not make it. And then I read this article. Believe me, this is related to my talk because I'm talking about intercultural education. I went to the library and I researched to see if I could get a better understanding of what they meant by people like me. The first article I read, I don't remember the exact title, but it was a research project conducted to assess the likelihood of faculty of color to make it in academia in the United States. By the way, in the United States, if you haven't figured it out, I wasn't born here. I was born in Manhattan. So that article concluded that there is a category of assistant professor who could never make it in academia. And there were certain, I think there were 4 characteristics. Women, count with me, women of color raising children. And I looked around. I had just resigned my tenured position as a teacher in public schools. And then to those 3 characteristics, I'm a woman of color. I was raising very young children, indeed. But I was also an immigrant. I spoke English with an accent, still do. And I realized that with all those 5 strikes, there is absolutely no way I was going to make it. But I was determined. So I started writing, but my colleagues kept interrupting me, reminding me that people like me cannot stay. Then I started writing with my door closed. Now I'm going to tell you a secret since you came to my lecture. A secret Provost Stearns does not know. But since he's stepping down from being provost, now he can know and laugh about it. When I accepted my first full-time position as a woman of color, immigrant, speaking English with an accent and raising young children, there is another thing that was a major strike against me that you really have to have in order to make it in academia. I could turn a computer on, but I really could not type. I was looking for M and W everywhere, and I said, people like me can't stay here. So people, after my first 2 years, they noticed publications coming and going, and updating my CV all the time. And they, how do you do that? Well, I'm going to share the secret with Provost Stearns. I still handwrite my drafts. All the books that are outside with my name on them, I handwrote every single draft to every single chapter because my brain connects only with the pen. in this auditorium tonight is the person who made it possible for me to stand here and have all those books published. Every time I finished handwriting, 10 pages, 5 pages, 7 pages, I would send them to her, and she would very fast type them out on those machines I could not operate. So when she would be typing, I would be writing the next article. So no wonder, in 4 or 5 years, I had an ICV, because I didn't have to look at the letters on the keyboard. Please join me in thanking my baby girl, Queen Shahuri, who has made it for me to make it here. So now that's my secret. So we're here to talk about peace education. I titled this A Calling and a Journey because you really cannot make anyone become a peacemaker. It's a journey, but being a journey, that means we acknowledge that we come from someplace, we're traveling along some kind of path or highway, but we do have a desired destination. My hopefully desired destination is a land of peace. There are enduring questions that we have to think about. These are the same enduring questions that have really shaped my path as an educator and as a researcher. And I invite you to look at them and think about them. The first question I have always challenged people to think about is, what is the purpose of education? Some of us really have stayed in school for many, many, many years. In 1 month exactly, today, I'll be 55 years old. But when I counted, I realized that I spent 24 years in school. That's really half of my life on earth. Imagine. But why? Is the world a better place to be? Is our community a better community because I was educated, I spent 24 years in school? I don't know. And I have been wondering through my research, what's missing in the current discourse about educational achievement? We make lots of noise about that. And what does education have to do with the quest for peace and social justice? And once we start to figure that out, I wonder, what kind of education do we need to create in order to prepare citizens who are knowledgeable, active, and committed agents of peace and nonviolence? I frame those questions in a context of great urgency. Probably there is no news here. Each day in America, 4 children are killed by abuse or neglect. More than 1,800 children are confirmed as abused or neglected. 5 children or teens commit suicide every single day in this beautiful country. 7 children or teens are killed by firearms. More than 200 children are arrested for violent crimes. More than 800 public school students are corporally punished. This is in the United States. More than 2,700 babies are born into poverty. Our context is also challenged by hate crimes. Can you imagine? In 2011, 47% of all the hate crimes were motivated by racial bias. And in case you're wondering, yes, Barack Obama was already president in 2011. 21% of those hate crimes were motivated by sexual orientation bias, 20% by religious bias, 12% by ethnicity and or national origin, and 1% by disability. I'm sharing these numbers with you so that we can begin together to wonder. Peace, nonviolence, what's violence anyway, and what's peace anyway? What do those things mean? Globally, we are also in a state of emergency. 37 active armed conflicts just in 2011, and 82 armed conflicts in the past 20 years. When you look at the chart, if I can find a pointer somewhere, yeah, there it is. The red one is Africa, yellow is Asia, this is by per region. The blue one is Europe, and the United States is gray, and so forth. So you see that globally we are still challenged by major conflicts. And when we look at the world map, at the concentration of fragility and warfare as of 2013, notice Africa and the Middle East, how challenged those regions are. I'm sharing this to partially justify why most of my work has been focused on Africa and African education to advance peace and peace education. What's at risk here? What do we lose? Lots of dead. You can read that. I don't have to read everything for you. In DRC alone, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, more than 2 million people dead in the war that still has to end. Lots of hundreds of thousands dead in Iraq. In Burundi, more than 100,000. In Syria, people are still dying. Not just dead, but refugees as well. Internally displaced people. And some people say, yeah, okay, we can count those. But most of the destruction cannot really be counted. The destruction of societal networks that I have uncovered through much of my research in Burundi. Destruction of the environment. Depletion of society's resources and infrastructures. And of course, a very diminished quality of life. Because if you are a refugee, if you are an internally displaced person, from my own personal experiences and from my research, you may think, yeah, I'm good. At least I'm not dead. But sometimes we realize that we're really dead inside. We have to raise children who do not have family, who do not remember family members, who cannot talk to their grandparents if their grandparents had a chance to survive. So we raise disconnected societies which lack roots, which is a major problem. When we talk about global and local conflicts, we also have to talk about poverty, because they go hand in hand. More than 1.3 billion people live in extreme poverty. That means on less than $1.25 a day. 12% of the world population do not have enough food to eat. And hunger is the #1 cause of death in the world, killing more than HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. And there is a major compounding problem here, because the poor, because they are so hungry, and their hunger traps them into poverty. You really can't write a book when you're hungry. You can't work on the farm when you're hungry. You may be wondering that she's mixing things. Well, what kind of violence is she talking? Is it just the weapons? Is it the guns? It's everything. Because there are different types of violence. Direct violence, that's what the statistics deal with most of the time. We can count the guns, we can count how many people were killed by firearms. Structural violence, sometimes we really don't talk about it, but it refers to the deliberate policies and structures that cause human suffering, death, and harm. And also, we really barely ever talk about cultural violence. For instance, the removal of Native American children into boarding schools. That was a major case of cultural violence. Colonialism, my friends, that's a major case of cultural violence, because it denotes cultural norms and practices that cause discrimination, injustice, and human suffering. But how do we get here? What are the causes of the kind of intergroup violence that has been the focus of my research projects in Burundi and other African countries? By the way, I'm going to draw quite a bit in this talk on my latest book, which is outside for you if you are interested, Exploring the Power of Nonviolence, 2013. I argue that the root of all forms of violence is the human tendency to dominate, oppress, and dehumanize, even exploit those whose cultural identities, orientations, and dispositions diverge from the society's expected norms, and thus challenge the worldview and social position of the dominant group by their mere existence. If you go to Burundi and Rwanda, where I have done much work, it's interethnic conflicts, Tutsis and Hutus and Twas. When you go to other places, like in Sierra Leone, it's a combination of ethnicity and tribal membership and religious membership, quite complicated at times. But what I need to note here, as I note in my book, is that all forms of violence are linked by their unavoidably negative impact on human life. And why direct violence is the form of violence that is most often recognized and discussed, structural and cultural violence are quite often its underlying causes. So we really need to pay attention to those two kinds of violence. So I come up with my second set of critical questions for us to ponder. How do we broaden intercultural education theory and practice to transform enduring intergroup conflicts and advance the quest for sustainable peace? How do we do that? And the second question, how do we create the space needed to imagine and encourage interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaboration in order to address the world's complex conflicts? But before we try to grapple with these very critical questions, we have to go back to the beginning where we started, because maybe some of you have been wondering. Please don't, this is the longest slide I have, so don't give up on me. I could not take one word away from this slide. My talk is titled Educating for Social Justice and Peace. But some of you may have different definitions of social justice, different definitions of peace. So I wanted to clarify, and I found, I think, the most comprehensive definition of social justice I have ever read about. It's even better than mine. So that's why I'm sharing it. Social justice is both a process and a goal. The goal of social justice is full and equal participation of all groups in a society that is mutually shaped to meet their needs. It includes a vision of society in which the distribution of resources is equitable and all members are physically and psychologically safe and secure. It denotes a society in which individuals are both self-determining and interdependent. It involves social actors who have a sense of their own agency, as well as a sense of social responsibility towards others, their society, and their broader world in which we live. And how about peace? We all know that it's more than just the absence of war. It implies human beings being able to work together to resolve conflicts, respect standards of justice, satisfy basic needs, and honor human rights. It involves a respect for life and for the dignity of each human being without discrimination or prejudice. So when we seek to educate for peace and social justice, in my view, and the way I have interpreted this call in my work, it means we're trying to raise peacemakers, both at home and at school, YMCA centers, wherever we interact with other human beings. So my colleagues from Burundi and I have tried to define what we understand by peacemaking. And we think that it refers to individual and collective dispositions, worldviews, attitudes, behaviors, and actions that affirm the diversity of backgrounds and narratives, uphold a common good, and sustain commitments to nonviolence and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. So if you are like me, you're sitting in your seat and you're wondering, Am I a peacemaker? To what extent? Where do I need to go? Where do I need to begin to become a peacemaker? And I have partial of an answer for you. Where do we begin? I think the easiest way for us to begin is to begin by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because, as Pillay stated in her inaugural speech, the comprehensive vision of human rights set forth in the Universal Declaration contemplates a world with the full realization of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights without a distinction, a world in which every man, woman, and child lives in dignity, free from hunger and protected from violence and discrimination, with the benefits of housing, healthcare, education, and opportunity. This is quite loaded. And somebody here in the room really understood his basic human rights one day. I tell stories sometimes. I'm going to tell you a quick story. There's somebody in this room once who really did not want to go to bed on time. He wanted more chicken. And, and then his mother was tired and kept insisting on that little boy going to sleep. And then the boy kept saying, no, I'm hungry. And mom keeps saying, please go to sleep. It's bedtime. You have already finished your dinner. And the 3-year-old then, joyfully and with lots of power, unexpected by his mother, stated, Mom, I'm hungry. I want chicken. It's against the law to send children to bed hungry. Did you hear that? Yes. Somebody said he did it. So, very quickly, the report was sent to his father, and his father communicated with his lovely wife and said, that sounds like something my mother would say. So that was my grandson. So we teach human rights very early on. So why is this important, human rights? Because we are all making plans for development, for security is a big concern for all of us, of course, peace and justice, but none of these, development, security, peace, and justice, cannot be fulfilled. They cannot be realized without human rights. And each of these pillars are undermined when discrimination and inequality, both blatant and in subtle ways, are allowed to fester and poison harmonious existence. Now let me ask you, all these words and more words and more words, and I promise to talk about education, but what does education have to do with it? Here again, I find myself borrowing from Shaw. I really want you to listen to these words and pay attention to this. There is no such a thing as a neutral educational process. Education either functions as an instrument that is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity to it, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. When I'm teaching and I share this powerful quote, this is the time when I look at my students and say, all right, don't take my words for it. If you think a word is okay as it is, nothing needs to be transformed, you have your A, you are dismissed. I'm always pleased that no one leaves, because it's a call here. The talk is called, a call and a journey. So we have to think about this. But freedom, it's very interesting for a woman who was born in Burundi to be talking about freedom, because culturally, this was almost a bad word where I was born and raised as a Burundian woman. But as an educator, I cherish it. Because as Paulo Freire says, education is the practice of freedom. as opposed to education as the practice of domination, denies that man is abstract, isolated, independent, and unattached to the world. It also denies that the world exists as a reality apart from people. Therefore, I concluded at the bottom of that slide that this really means to me that education for freedom is a practice of freedom, is education for social responsibility. The kind of social responsibility that forces us to think beyond ourselves and our own interest to the common good. But what does that really mean? What's the essence of social responsibility? I argue with Walk 2009 that social responsibility is about shaping human beings with intellectual curiosity, a caring heart, sometimes that's what we miss, and a belief in the common good. We still need to do quite a lot of work on that one. Teaching for social responsibility, therefore, according to my work, is teaching for caring, that is, inspiring students to see local and global problems and injustices and to develop the ethical commitments to enact positive change. But we also have to live as socially responsible people. And this means understanding and acting to improve the many problems confronting our global community. Therefore, as you will read in my work, educating for social justice then is really educating for social responsibility is educating for social justice and peace, if we can figure out how. And that's the next question. How do we do that? I argue that a comprehensive answer is to build bridges of caring consciousness. It took me a while to put those words together. And then, of course, it took me much longer to figure out how to explain to them, to other people. So I argue that bridges of caring consciousness are characterized by a deep understanding of one's own cultural identity, orientations, and dispositions that can only be achieved through sustained, honest, critical self-reflection. A genuine interest in understanding others' narratives resulting from their identities, orientations, and dispositions. And number 3, unshakable conviction that human interdependence is a constant reality that shapes the journey of self and others. And number 4, commitment to and active engagement in the individual and collective task to transform structures, institutions, and social relations to maximize opportunities for the self-actualization of self and others in diverse contexts, devoid of fear, tension, suspicion, discrimination, and prejudice. My friend, this is a big thing. So when we send our children to school, to George Mason, to public schools or private schools, and then after much investigation, learn that they have been pushed repeatedly off the swings during recess. Blacks don't swing on this one. And then we start wondering how come they're not taking AP geometry, AP statistics. Those two don't go together. If we want our children to excel, we have to create the circumstances, the context at home and in schools that actually help them to excel. When we push them away because of who they are, we're destroying their capacity to build inner peace. And without inner peace, self-actualization will never happen. Or maybe, but really it will be seriously delayed. So this is why I call this talk a calling, because no one really can tell us what to do. I can't even tell you what to do. I'm here saying lots of words and quoting lots of things, and I can't even ask you to remember one thing when you step out of this auditorium. But I'm just requesting each of us to look inside in ourselves as educators, as neighbors, as church leaders, as leaders in the mosque, at the synagogue, and just to wonder. Fear. To what extent are we building context devoid of fear, tension, suspicion, discrimination, and prejudice? Until then, we need to take much more time to figure out how to continue moving on our journey towards social justice and peace. I argue then that such bridges of caring consciousness, which are grounded in the inalienable pursuit of the common good, are engineered through critical multicultural or intercultural education. But what's that? Some of you may never have heard about this academic jargon. We have to write like that in order to publish them, you know. So I'm going to explain to them. So, critical multicultural education, as I argue in my 2006 and 2013 publications, denotes the transformation of the policies, practices, instruction materials, and strategies with the purpose of building educational systems that empower educators and learners to become transformative intellectuals, cultural border crossers, social activists, and critical engineers of a new social order. It empowers individuals and communities to reclaim their humanity. Here is another crowded slide. But how do I teach that? The way I have really conceptualized education for me, critical multicultural education and critical intercultural education, was to center whatever I do in my classes, whatever assignments I give to my students to do, on a certain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 goals. And those goals are to enable participants to research, discover, and appreciate their own cultural backgrounds. This is very important, because once I was starting this class as an adjunct in a state, he wasn't here, don't worry, you're not in this room. And this gentleman who was a practicing teacher in business education for many years, after we went through the syllabus, he raised his hand and he said, "Dr. Ndura, this is on multicultural education." I said, "Could you please tell me what your class has to offer to the white redneck?" I was still young then. Believe me, I really had no idea what a white redneck meant. But I knew I was in trouble. So after feeling just this deep sense of gratitude, because my heart sank, because but I don't blush, I'm privileged. So I kept quiet for a second, and I reflected very fast, and I said, "Well, sir, this is not a class that's going to instruct you to give everything that you have to the disadvantaged Black folks or Asians or Native Americans." I said, "Whatever you have is yours." And I said, "I only have 2 goals for us in this class." I said, "Number 1 is to understand who you are as a cultural human beings and what your contributions to the world are. And number 2 is to also maybe understand me while I'm trying to understand you, and hopefully figure out how we can work together to make this world a better place." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you like the answer?" And he said with pride, "I'll stay." And he stayed through the entire semester. I had to do research to find out what a redneck was. So, the second goal is to develop their awareness of and appreciation for different cultures, to enable them to acquire the knowledge, attitudes, and skills needed to function effectively in different cultural settings, to teach cross-cultural communication, to help participants define and resolve to assume their individual and collective responsibilities for achieving educational equity and social justice, to develop intercultural competencies necessary to foster harmonious intergroup relationships and advance local, national, and world peace, and finally, to bring all the participants to the realization that the divide and conquer policies and practices have caused more damage than provided solutions to our enduring social challenges. But in my real work, how have I really helped teachers around the globe, in Burundi, in the United States, Sierra Leone, wherever I go, to really educate for social justice and peace? I think that educating for social justice and peace is inspiring youth to envision a hopeful future. But how do we do that? When I was a high school teacher, I had graduated from a US university with a degree in multicultural and bilingual education and curriculum instruction, lots of things. So I was kind of smart, but there is something I did not know because no one taught me. Remember, I'm an immigrant. No one taught me that a white person could be poor. So one day during lunchtime in high school, this young lady, seemingly of Caucasian background, came to me. She was so excited. Dr. Ndura, can I talk to you during lunch? Can I talk to you? The kids loved me. I said, yes, sure. How do you like my shirt? And she shows me her shirt. And I'm looking. I'm almost confused, but I'm not showing my confusion. That's a T-shirt. What's special in that T-shirt? I said, yes, I said, it's beautiful. It is. I can't remember, I'm African too. There are questions I won't ask because I want to give away the fact that I don't know the source of her excitement. And then she revealed it. It's my first new shirt in 4 years. Really? And I'm going to myself with chills, white, T-shirt, first new, 4 years. And then I started paying more attention. So my students taught me that poverty had no color lines, that everybody could be poor. But during colonial education in Africa, we were only taught one thing. White folks were always rich. So whenever they came to visit, all of us would crowd around them and ask for money. And even now, when you write to some of my classmates that I left behind, believe me, by letter number 2, they will be asking for a radio or a camera. Okay? Because they know white people are very rich and they will give you all the things. So I learned that by sharing just some of my personal experiences, I could inspire that young lady to keep going, that maybe at some point she will be able to buy herself new T-shirts as often as she wants instead of waiting for 4 years. I shared my backgrounds about growing up in a thatched roof, little round hut, but how my dream was always to be in a little house with a tin roof, like the one I walked by daily on my way to the elementary school, 5-6 miles away. We all have dreams. When my 7th graders, some of them, by the end of the second quarter, did not want to do homework, I shared personal stories about the importance of education, how probably I would not be alive had it not been for my good education. So don't be afraid of sharing your private, personal stories. Educating for social justice and peace is also advancing youth's positive engagement in social transformation. How do I do that? And how can you do that? Here at George Mason University, I have tried to practice just that through the Senior Fellowship of Peacebuilding through intercultural dialogue, whose goal is to build bridges of caring consciousness through service learning. I believe in service learning. So, for example, one of my students this year constructed projects to increase awareness about domestic violence. Another one partnered with an elementary school and cultivated community gardens. Another one encouraged intergroup dialogue through film and so forth. So service learning. I promised these ladies that I will always honor them whenever I share their pictures. I took these pictures on the streets of Freetown in Sierra Leone during one of my research projects. Educating for social justice is empowering students to alleviate human suffering. But how can you do that? First of all, we have to teach the students to understand that human suffering is actually a reality. In my classes, this is just one example, a test of reality, living below the poverty threshold. The goal of the activity is to uncover the truth about socioeconomic inequity and the cost of poverty. I just asked students to list 10 possessions that characterize their lifestyles, what car they drive, what they eat, where they shop for their clothes, what kind of shoes they wear. And then I instruct them to cross out all those possessions, activities, hobbies, food habits, and so forth that they would have to do without if they had to raise a family of 4 on $23,000, which is the federal poverty threshold. And then it starts to click. Suddenly, their expensive car is gone. Their shoes, it looks like they're going to have to find a pair of shoes somewhere in a thrift store, as opposed to going to the most expensive store. So I help them understand by using real-life examples. These are school children in Sierra Leone in one of the province districts that I visited. Really, war, violence, poverty, and the conscience of the nation and of the international community. So I believe that educating for social justice is affirming voices of the common good among current and future generations. How can we do that in our classrooms? I'm a pedagogue, so we always have to do the how-to. That's what I promised. In my classes, I really encourage my students to redefine the simple concept of democracy itself, because just casting a vote is really not democracy. So democracy, according to Campbell, is about the equal distribution of power. It's based on such values as the belief that each person has equal merit, the right to equal treatment before the law, equality of opportunity, equal respect for all, and the encouragement of free choice. But if we have to redefine democracy, we also have to redefine citizenship. A passport is no longer sufficient for us to proclaim ourselves citizens of the United States, let alone citizens of the world. So I define reflective citizenship as something that should be conceived as the re-examination of and deconstruction and unlearning of the hegemonic discourse of dominance and oppression that pervades our individual and collective lived experiences and dispositions. It is about understanding that as human beings, we are forever bound in a destiny that only we can define. I could even stop here if you promise to remember that statement. What I do impacts you, what you do impacts you, me, and my children and my grandchildren, and vice versa. Remember, we're going back to Freire. We are not abstract. We are not separate from our world. So, how do we refrain education and therefore teacher education? So I argue that we need curriculum reform in order to develop educators' capacity to teach for peace across all subject areas. And that's what one of my books outside demonstrates. And a friend of mine, who is very dear to me in the room, helped me to conceptualize what educators' professional development should look like. It should focus, as we argue, on critical thinking skills, instruction materials evaluation, adaptation and development, student-centered pedagogy, and peacemaking and conflict resolution pedagogy grounded in critical, intercultural, and multicultural education. We're almost there. This means that we must re-examine with greater intentionality the enduring question about what it means to be educated, and create spaces for negotiated understandings to articulate educational policies that will shape our desired futures, and I'm hoping that your desired futures is the same as mine, communities of peace. We need to create partnerships across ideological orientations and academic disciplines. Why do we need to do that? In order for us to cultivate individual and collective dispositions, commitments, and actions that promote harmonious relationships and accountability to social justice and peace, and the quest for peace. Why do we need to do this? Because such partnerships are the prime prerequisite for sustainable futures. Otherwise, we'll continue destroying what we have built, and no one will win. And finally, where am I? I go to the previous one. No, that one. Tonight's lecture is really a call for professional collaboration, for constant reflection and questioning of our individual and collective dispositions and motivations. It's a time for us to seek and to give honest answers. And as I concluded in my introduction to one of the books that's outside, it's an opportunity for all of us each time to ponder our contributions. When we wake up in the morning, how can I make a positive difference? When we go to bed at night, how have I contributed to making this a better world? It's in the conclusion of this, the introduction to this book, that's one of my favorite. And finally, educating for social justice and peace is celebrating the journey. That means we never finished. We continue to grow and learn, and having the courage to march forward. And I'm going to close because this is my final slide. I have to make my grandson's day. Remember how I welcomed you in the language that you all understand, and now I shall send you off in the language that my grandsons understand. Chanson de paix. Je vous apporte des chants de paix du cœur des héros méconnus. Je vous apporte des paroles d'espoir, murmurées des terres profondes, abritant des esprits inoubliables. Des esprits chantant des chansons de paix, des esprits chuchotant des mots d'espoir, espoir pour la paix, pour vous et pour moi. De tous ceux qui parlent swahili à travers les vastes océans et les rivières serpentantes, Amani. De la part de tous ceux qui parlent ewe dans les villes dynamiques et les villages calmes, Tifafa. De tous les arabophones à travers les marais verts et les déserts sablés, Salam. De tous les francophones au-delà des montagnes intimidantes et des vallées roulantes, la paix. De tous les anglophones sur la terre-mer et au-delà de la galaxie, peace. Et du fond de mon cœur, Amahoro. Je vous apporte des chants de paix, ensemble nous danserons à l'unisson du lever au coucher, au lever du soleil. Unis dans le cœur et l'esprit, chaque pas nous menant plus près de la paix éternelle. Je vous apporte des chants de paix du cœur des héros méconnus, Amani, Tifafa, Salam, la paix, peace, Amahoro. Thank you.